Hey, we're inside the internet, and today we're going to look at an ink that's really, really ridiculously good looking. Sorry. Anyways, yeah, welcome to the Triple N Network. Today we're going to look at an ink by Noodlers, made for Dromgooles of Houston. It's Blue Steel. Yeah, I actually have it in bottle form, but not its original bottle. This was sent to me by the wonderful, original, mysterious benefactor, and it was sent to me in this JR Bond bottle. But yeah, as you might be able to see, yeah, it's a lovely shade of blue. Very thankful for that bottle. I've rather enjoyed this ink. Now, two pens I used were these. They're both Jinhao X450. Sorry, no, they are Hero 616s, and this one is the kind that you'd get right out of the blister pack, because that's how I've gotten all of mine, and I have like 30 of them. As you can probably tell, it's a fairly fine-tipped nib, so it's very fine writing, but the fine one is the unaltered one. It's exactly how it came out of the box. I didn't smooth it or anything. And then I also used one of these. This is one of my 616s that I altered to make broader and wetter, and I'm pretty sure this is the exact one, because again, I have 30 and sometimes they're hard to keep track of. But yeah, so those are the two pens that I used. And yeah, so Zoolander, sorry. I couldn't resist. It's Blue Steel. I mean, come on. But yeah, so we're gonna look at this ink. It's, again, it's exclusive to Dromgooles, and I think it was originally made for a pen show in Texas like several years ago by Nathan. And I don't know if it's still made, but it's a lovely shade of blue. It has some nice sort of slightly green undertones. Apparently it's supposed to look like the bluing that you see on, actually you don't just see it on older firearms. Apparently you can still get it done. But yeah, coming from San Francisco where we essentially don't have guns, I can't attest to that, but apparently that's what they're going for. So let's look at some comparisons. So here's Blue Steel, and here's Diatramentus Midnight Blue, which you might be able to see, although the camera's not showing it quite as much as it is in real life. This one does have a bit more green in it. Next up is another Noodler's ink. This one is, I don't know how to pronounce it, I've just been calling it Skatigue. Again, this is maybe just a little bit more green to it. And now this next one is going to take some explanation. So this next one is also from the Noodler's Texas series. This is Texas Blue Bonnet when it's fresh out of the bottle. And as you might be able to tell, it's a little bit darker, and it's actually a little bit more green. But the thing is, this is when it's fresh out of the bottle, but when you let it age, it actually changes color, and it turns into sort of this nice lighter blue, this softer blue. But yeah, this was after it had been in a pen for I think about 3 days, or once it's been decanted in a vial, plastic vial, for about 3 days, it changes color. So I don't know if that's something that only happens to my Blue Bonnet, but because of it, I've been resisting reviewing it, because I don't know how to capture both or neither. But yeah, so Blue Bonnet, when fresh, actually looks quite like Blue Steel, but when you give it a couple of days, it doesn't. So yeah, there's that. And then the last comparison I had was Diamine's, I've only ever heard British people pronounce this, so I've just called it Eau de Nil, but apparently it means water of the Nile. But yeah, as you can see, Eau de Nil is a bit lighter, and but it has the exact same touch of green in it, so I feel like if there's a way to thin that out a little bit, maybe we'd get that. I'm sorry, I may have to edit that out. Yeah, so there are your comparisons. Yeah. Now, okay, bear in mind, I've been holding on to this review for a while. Like, this review it's been in the box completed for quite some time, to the point that it doesn't have any Fabriano. There's no Fabriano tested, and I don't even have the chemical tests. I've wanted to do one before I posted it, but then I forgot, so my apologies. We'll just go straight into the chromatography, and we're going to zoom in. But yeah, bear with me, because there's no way to do this with grace. Yeah, so you can probably tell, even without reading them, which one's which. But yeah, this one on the right that says dried was the one I let dry. Now, that's not how you're supposed to do it, but I feel like it's really taught me a lot about how inks behave over the years, just by looking at them side by side and noticing the differences, because you can probably very distinctly notice what happened here, just in the difference of 20 minutes. So this is the way you're supposed to do it, where I put the line of ink and then pretty much instantly dunked it in the water. And you can definitely see where that initial drop was put. It's fairly dark, and you can see the little hints of gray all throughout, and then there's sort of this hazy little light blue going up, and then this band of gray right here, and then this shock of just beautiful blue. It really is a lovely blue. It's not quite a medium blue, it's not quite a sky blue, but it's something around that. Now, how long do I let these dry? However long it takes this to dry after it's dunked in water. So maybe 10 minutes. Yeah, no, maybe 20, but somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. And look at the very distinct difference. I mean, this gray clearly decided to stay. You can see the little bits of it that wanted to. So instead we have this very dark, very noticeable dot down at the bottom. We have the same sort of light hazy blue, but then it goes instantly into this bright blue, which I think is quite interesting. But yeah, so, and often these results imply that there's a good bit of water resistance within the ink. So that's another reason why it's fun to do these, because it can really reveal how an ink will behave later on. But yeah. Alright, now, for the first couple tests, I actually have several results. So I first tested it on this Clairefontaine Sayez paper, and I got kind of funny results, and they didn't feel quite right, so I decided to retest it. And I used this Clairefontaine, where I got better results. It was more well-behaved. Now, here's something that really surprised me. This ink dried quite quickly, like almost worrisomely quickly. You know how sometimes like when inks really seep in, you're like, oh god, this is an aggressive ink, something's gonna happen here. And yeah, so that sort of unaltered finer nib took 4.5 seconds to dry. The broader, wetter nib took 7.5. And this is 90-gram paper. This is very dense paper. So I thought, okay, this has got to be an aggressive ink. We're gonna have some problems. But we really don't. We even can see just a little bit of shading throughout. There's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. All very good. Okay, so that, as you can probably tell, is from me sopping up the water from the water test. It just got onto the back of the page. But yeah, so very well behaved in that regard. Again, you can sort of see just the gentle hints of blue underneath. Very nice. And again, let's look at this water test. Exactly like the chromatography implied. A lot of that bright blue is washing off, and actually it barely even dyed the page. And what we're left with is sort of a gray-green, but it's very clear, very there. Didn't feather, didn't explode. Now, again, with the Rhodia, this was coming from the bottom of the block, so I was getting these very unusual results. They didn't feel right. And then we were getting a lot of like near bleed, and then I realized this is a piece from the bottom of the block. And I don't know if this happens to anyone else, but it does happen to me, and as someone who understands paper, I know why. Sometimes when you get to the bottom of a notebook or, you know, a sheaf or a block of paper, the further down into the block you get, the worse the performance is. And that was what I was seeing here. It looked like that, so I decided to retest it. So instead we have this teeny little bit of Rhodia number 10, or maybe it's 11. But yeah, and this was much more along the lines of what I expected. Here we can see shading. Again, we got very quick dry times, but here, I just want you to see that in the broader, wetter nib, it gets very dark, very, very intense. It's mildly wet flowing. I'd say it's maybe a 6 out of 10, but since it's seeping into the page quite quickly, it's almost hard to tell. But yeah, as you can see, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. Very well behaved in that regard. And again, in the water test, it's exactly like the chromatography showed us. That blue is washing away, and what we're getting is sort of this dark gray with hints of green, but it's very clear, very there, very noticeable. All good in that regard. Now again, there's no Fabriano, so we're just moving straight into Tomoe River. And here, it's quite a shake-up, I guess you could say. But yeah, there's very nice shading on here. Very nice. Now, Tomoe River is known for drawing out shading and sheen and dry times and echo. And we kind of got all of that, especially because so far, this ink has been seeping into the pages so quickly. Like, I don't think it's taken 10 seconds anywhere so far. And this is, you know, a fairly wet ink. But here, Tomoe River is just like, nope, not doing it, because that's what Tomoe River tends to do. So that unaltered fine nib took 16 seconds to dry, which the exclamation point is because that now seems incredibly long after, what, 3.5 seconds and 6 seconds? That broader, wetter nib took 24. Again, the exclamation point is because, like, wow, we went from 6 to 24. But again, we get this really nice shading. And we get this, like, dark, almost like shininess in some spots. And that's really, really beautiful. But if we also look here, see these, like, weird patches? These, like, hints of blue. And we see it here also. Now, this is something that I don't think I've ever experienced before. So, very extended dry times. And then some areas where it was very thick could still smear after it dried. And I think maybe it was like a false dawn kind of thing, like it looked dry, and so when I put my hand there to like move up the page and keep writing, I put my fingers in it because it looked dry, but it wasn't. But yeah, so that was confusing, but so that's what that is. So, I don't know, maybe just be careful. Also the dots, so like the dot of the eye in ink, or its, or whatever, those took minutes to dry. For some reason, I don't know, maybe it has something to do with surface tension and evaporating speed or something, but dots took forever to dry. So that was a little odd. However, I'd like to point out that these dry times compared to most inks on Tomoe River are totally fine. In fact, it's quite often now for a broader, wetter pen to take more than 30 seconds. So again, this is just kind of strange on a scale where it went from like less than 10 to this. So it seemed like a very odd transition. Now there's no bleed, no feather, no spread. There's no sheen, but there is this weird dark shininess. There might be some echo, especially in the broader, wetter nib, just because, you know, it puts down a lot of ink. But there is something I'd like to point out that I didn't notice until afterwards. Now I'm going to bring this in real close. You see these eyes? The same eyes that took like forever to dry? See how they're actually that same light blue that we see underneath here? I just thought that was really interesting. And then we see it again. Again, the dots on the back of the water test, they're that light blue. I don't have an explanation for that. I'm just saying, like, pointing it out because I thought it was interesting. But again, Tomoe River loves to letting slide away when you add more water. And it didn't. Not really. And, I mean, it did when I went to, like, sop it up. All that blue came right off. But again, this is very clear, very there, quite dark. But again, I just want to point this out. So, like, look at the W and the A. See how blue that is? I don't know why. Something very strange is going on here. And then these dots, they're also very blue, but also it's like the gray started to smear off when I was drawing it. It was very curious, but yeah, I just wanted to point that out because I thought that was quite interesting. Now, for the next 3 tests on the more economical papers, I only use that unaltered fine nib. However, you know, I mean, like, literally, I've gotten these in 10 packs for $8. So I'm sure the the oversight is very small, and so it could, you know, be different one pen to another. And this is an already fairly wet ink, so we're not going to see the best results. But yeah, this is 20-pound copier paper, and this is not the worst 20-pound copier paper, but the stuff I had before, because that's just how old this test is, but it's still really darn bad. So yeah, here I say it dried almost instantly. By what I mean is it seeped into the paper essentially instantly. And we have no more shading, but we do have a wooliness. We have feathering, as we can see. Yeah, I actually still like the color. But yeah, again, this is a fairly wet ink, and it could be a wet-ish fine. I honestly can't tell. But it is... there's a lot of show-through. There is a good bit of show-through. Now, maybe in a more well-designed and manufactured pen, like maybe, I don't know, a Japanese medium or even a Japanese fine with a more controlled flow, maybe this would be a bit better. And again, since this is just awful paper, you probably have something at least a little better than this, but yeah, not the best results, but now let's check out this water test, because I think this is rather fascinating. We can literally see the blue trying to separate from that greenish gray. This is what I mean by like letting it dry. You really start to learn something about the ink. You can see how it's going to behave later on. Now these water tests in all these pages were done maybe 20 or 30 minutes after it dried. So maybe double the time that this got, but still. You can see that blue separating, but that gray-green at the center, look at it. It's very clear, very there, still very dark. It's not moving, it's not freaking out. I almost feel like if I kept adding water and like kept flushing that blue away, it would be absolutely easy to read. And then let's look at the back. Look at what's coming out the back. It's that blue. It's that same blue. It's like it's trying to escape out the back. So, yeah, there's that. Now, next up is Mead Notebook Paper. It's very common in the United States, especially for people still in school. This is the type that you'd find in a composition book or like a lab notebook, not the kind you'd find in a spiral notebook. So this stuff actually feels a lot like newsprint, like a newspaper. So it's what is it? It's large pulp. It's large pulp type paper, which means that the chunks of fiber that they press into a page are actually larger, which makes it more spongy, which is really not ideal for fountain pen ink. But again, this is very common paper for kids in the United States, at least when they're still in school. So figured it was worth testing, and that's what I had at the time. Now it took half a second to dry, but I mean, look at how little of it smeared. You really don't get any shading. We do get a woolliness, and we do get some feathering, but honestly, it's mostly just feather or woolliness. We don't see a lot of like huge distinct feathers. It's mostly just a texture change. Now, I wanted to point this out just because I forgot. Now, here is the fine on 20 pound, and here is the fine on Tomoe River. There's some spread, but it's not as severe as we've seen in the past. So like here's that broader, wetter nib. It's really not so terrible. And here on the Mead, we actually have even less. In fact, it's almost none at all compared to the Tomoe River. So that's quite nice. We don't have as much spread. We do have a lot of show through, but then again, this paper is physically thinner than 20 pound paper. This is a wet flowing ink. This stuff is essentially like writing on newspaper. If you've ever tried to do like the crossword in a fountain pen, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. This is actually quite impressive because as you can see, you can see it from the back very clearly, but there's very little of it that came all the way through, which is quite nice. And again, I think it's interesting that all the stuff coming out of the back is just that blue. Because when we look at the water test, now, if you've seen any of my videos, you've seen how this paper can freak out when you add water. It really didn't. Like, look at the stuff at the center. It's so clear, so there. It didn't feather, didn't wash away, didn't get like too light to read. It's just that blue trying to escape. Everything else is totally recoverable. Now, lastly is Moleskine Notebook Paper, which I hate because it's very poorly made and yet quite expensive, especially for what you're getting. Now, I'm not even sure I have to bring this in that much. You can like see this woolliness. You can see this gross texture that it's taken on. You can see the little bits of paper that they mashed into paper, the fibers. And look at this feathering. This is huge, distracting feathering. Ugh. I mean, it's just hideous. It took 4.5 seconds to dry. We've got little spots of bleed throughout. Admittedly, it's not as visible. Calm down, camera. It's not as visible through the back, but it's still pretty bad. If you're sensitive to it, and I am sensitive to it, that would drive me crazy. And for the first time in a water test, we've seen it freak out. I mean, look, the stuff at the center got lighter. It got quite light, and it looks like it's half letting go. And that blue stuff, instead of like washing away in an orderly fashion, like we've seen before, it just started to like feather and explode, and it's becoming distracting. It almost looks like a firework or something. It's hideous. I hate Moleskine, and I hate ending on it because it always puts me in such a sour mood. But yeah, so there you go. For your consideration, Noodler's Blue Steel. It's really, really, really ridiculously good looking. Kind of, I don't know. It's an interesting color. It has some definitely interesting water resisting properties. Because it acts like a slightly aggressive ink, it doesn't do fantastic on cheap papers, but honestly it could be a lot worse. I mean, it didn't feather much, it did get kind of woolly, it did spread a bit, but I think in a more well-manufactured pen you might get some better results. Yeah, I actually don't know if they're still making this, but yeah, look into it. It's pretty interesting. So for your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.